and welcome to the Rally Point with Dominic Fielder, the author of the King's German series, and myself, Rob McLaren, the author. Oh, where is he? The author of the Joubert series. Hello, Dominic Fielder.
Hello, Rob. Happy New Year to you. How are you?
I'm superbly well, sir. Superbly well. Each month at the Rally Point, we catch up with friends who enjoy the Napoleonic period. And now, everyone, we're recording the first 30 minutes of the gathering, but once the recording is over, we remain online as the conversation continues. And this month, we'd like to welcome Martin Boycott-Brown to the Rally Point. Martin is the author of The Road to Rivoli, Napoleon's First Campaign, and is based in Cambridge, United Kingdom. Martin, welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Good
Over
evening
to you.
Here.
And all good evening, yes.
I'm going to start this presentation by looking rapidly at Rivoli in context. I'm then going to look at the Austrian plan for the Rivoli offensive and the terrain. Going to look at the battlefield, the ridge of San Marco, the main combat area, and the Pontare, which is the road up from the Adige Valley into the main combat area. And just a brief look at the monument. As I say, I've got a lot to get through, so this will be a bit of a mad gallop, but fingers crossed we'll manage. This is a map of section of northern Italy. Rivoli is where you see the arrow finish there, just by Lake Garda. And I wanted to draw your attention to the area inside the blue line there, which is that blue line marks the border between Italy and Austria. This is the 18th century border, which is much further south than the modern border. And I think this just emphasizes just how close Austrian territory, Austrian home territory was to Rivoli. And the other thing to mention here is this line shows us roughly the demarcation line between the foothills of the Alps and the flatland of the Po Valley. And once again, you can see that Rivoli is right on this demarcation line. So one of the reasons why Rivoli is important, it's one of the last defensive positions before you reach the flat lands of the Po Valley. So Rivoli, in the political and strategic context, is an important position. And it's a position that Napoleon would have known about before he even got to Italy, because he had a copy of the memoirs of the Marechal de Maillebois. And there is a description both of the Adige Valley, short description, and also of the defensive positions in this area, among which Rivoli is mentioned. Moving on, I'm sure you all know the broad outlines of the Italian campaign, in that the French moved very rapidly from the Italian Riviera into Lombardy, captured Milan, moved across the Po Valley as far as Mantua. Weren't able to capture Mantua immediately, and then of course there is a long siege of Mantua. The reason why they needed to capture Mantua was because it was capable of holding a large garrison, and it was far too dangerous to leave it behind. The strategic plan that Napoleon had begun with was to go northwards from this area of Italy to pass into Austria from the south. That wouldn't have been possible if Mantua had still been under Austrian control. And what we're looking at here is what is known or has been called the quadrilateral, which is this four-sided area of the north of Italy. And it was said that whoever controlled the quadrilateral controlled northern Italy. At the corners, at the four corners, are four fortresses: Peschiera, Verona, Legnago, and Mantua. Mantua being the most powerful, the strongest of them. Why are they important? Well, Verona controls traffic down the Adige River. From the north, Legnago controls traffic up the river from the south. Peschiera controls access from Lake Garda to the River Mincio, which goes all the way down to Mantua. And this was an important artery for supplying the fortress of Mantua. This was very important to the Austrians. Now, let me just move something. What was the Austrian plan? Very simple. Background, of course, is that they have attempted various times to relieve this French siege of Mantua. This is their final attempt. It's their fourth and final attempt. And their plan is to march down the Adige Valley from the north, cross the flat land of the Po Valley, relieve Mantua. Problem. Reaching Mantua via the Adige Valley was not simple because of the terrain, and that's probably why it was the last of the options that they took. Previously, they'd come down the western side of Lake Garda, resulting in the battles of Lonato and Castiglione. Then they tried coming across from the east, which of course resulted in the Battle of Arcole, another failure. This is their last attempt. They're going down the Adige. Now, what are the problems with coming down the Adige? Well, on the eastern side of the valley, you have La Chiusa. And here's a little map of the area around Rivoli. You can see Rivoli off left center there. The road, the potential route down the eastern bank of the Adige is from Dolce in the north, past Ceradino or Ceraino, as it's sometimes called. Where you see the point of that arrow is a place called La Chiusa. Difficult to see, but this picture, it's an old 19th century picture, which gives you an idea of what La Chiusa was. La Chiusa was a Venetian fort which had been built precisely for the purpose of blocking off that side of the Adige Valley. Not a big fortress, but it had a drawbridge, and it would have been very difficult to overcome it, to capture it, to take it. Even if you did manage to capture it, the road beyond the fortress is very narrow. It's very unsuitable for moving large numbers of troops. And as you can see, the valley walls are absolutely sheer for hundreds of feet. This is big country. Moving on, what's the problem with the western side? Well, we have the Pontare, which is the road up out of the valley. You can see this yellow line showing you the route. In certain books, this road this area is called the Osteria Gorge. It's not a gorge, at least not in my opinion. but there you are. That name has come to be known, so some of you will probably know it by that name, but the locals call it the Pontare. This is not an easy option. You'll see why in a second. This is what the terrain looks like looking across the River Adige from just north of La Chiusa. The blue line indicates roughly where the River Adige is. Right in front of us, you can see the flat terrain, which is where the Austrians put some artillery during the battle to bombard the French defenses on the other side of the River Adige. The Pontare, the road, roughly takes that line out of the valley up towards the flat land. I just wanted to draw your attention to this crest here, this line. That's the main French defensive position during the battle is the French defensive position facing north, that is, Monte Trambasore. In some books, because the English can't spell this, appears as Trombalora. Drives me mad, but there we are. It's actually Monte Trambasore. We'll see more of that later. Now, what does the area look like? The area of the Pontare, this road up. Here we're standing on the spur, the end of the high spur that stops where the Pontare is, and you're looking down at the road up, if that makes sense. On the picture on the left, and this is the area of the battlefield which has been most changed by modern building. Aside from that, the battlefield is relatively unharmed, if I can use that term. It's pretty similar to the way it was in the past. But here you've got the canal, obviously, which is modern, and the Autostrada del Brennero, for those who want to rush up and down between Italy and Austria. But apart from that, not too much has been changed. However, the old road probably took about that line, roughly speaking, from the valley on the left up to the higher ground on the right. The modern road, the old road might have been a bit closer to the spur. It's difficult to tell. Rob's been down that road, so he'll have some idea of what it's like. It's a steep road. You can see that the modern road, you can see just on the right, just below, just above, sorry, the yellow arrow, you can see the hairpin bends. That gives you an idea that this is a mountain type of road. It's pretty steep. The photograph on the right gives you more of an idea of what the terrain is like when you reach the top of that road, the top of the Pontare. That's how the road comes up. It passes behind that spur that you can see there, and you're only really at the top of the road where you see the point of that yellow arrow. That's where you've got up to the top of the road. Obviously, the French had constructed all kinds of defenses to stop people getting up from the Adige Valley onto the flat land. We'll have a look at those a bit more later. Now, obviously, the Austrians hoped to climb out of the valley at this point, but they weren't really intending to fight their way up. They were hoping that the French defenses here would have been eliminated by the time they had to climb out of the valley. Because the other part of the Austrian plan involved assembling forces roughly in the area of the Adige Valley that you see indicated there. And then you will see right in the middle of the map there is a red circle around Ferrara di Montebaldo. Pardon me. That's where the French outposts were. This is the furthest French defensive position. They're pushing right towards Austrian territory here. And the Austrian plan was to attack the outposts at Ferrara di Montebaldo, drive them back, and then progress southwards over the land, roughly like this, one column coming directly down from the north. Another column would climb out of the valley up a ravine, and another, sadly for them, had the job of going over the mountain peaks and trying to turn the French positions from the French left. This is Lusignan's little band of men. What I can only feel sorry for them, to be frank. I mean, to have that job was, and it doesn't bear thinking about. Having driven in the French outposts, the idea was that they would progress in this direction and take the French defensive positions around the top of the Pontare in the rear. All very fine on paper. This gives you an idea of what the terrain is like around about Ferrara. This is, I think, Spiazzi actually, but you can see that this is very rugged terrain. This is not flat land. This is foothills of mountains, twisting, turning roads. In that period, rocky, stony roads, difficult roads. Difficult terrain to move along. It was said that it was possible to arrive this far with carriages, but it was impossible to move heavy artillery up roads as far as this. So pretty much the French defenses up in this area were infantry. They may have had some small guns with them, but this is not easy terrain, is basically what I'm saying. Now, Lusignan, who had this job of going over the top of Monte Baldo, well, this is Monte Baldo in the summer, which is lovely. It's nice for hiking. I've been up there. It took me 7 hours to get to the top and 6 hours to come down again. And I'm never doing it again, that's for sure, because I'm too old. It was one of the most testing things I've ever done in my life. But as I say, this is the summer. This is what it looks like in the winter. Lusignan's little band of men had this lovely job of going over this, a nice little hike, nice little winter hike, carrying all of your firewood with you, carrying all of your food with you, because there's no firewood up there. And after they had this little excursion, they were supposed to fight the French at Ferrara. Well, they didn't make it, which is not surprising because it was reported that there was 6 feet of snow on Monte Baldo at this particular period. So they had to go over the crest and down the other side, and they came down somewhere around about Malcesine. This is Malcesine, which is on the coast of Lake Garda, and it's about 10 miles north of Rivoli, about 15, 16 kilometers for those of you who work in clicks. So you can see that, I mean, the idea was that they, having come down the lakeside, they now had to go back over the mountain to attack the French. Well, you can you can just judge how likely that was. Climbing out of the Adige Valley to get to Ferrara di Montebaldo was not much of a picnic either. This is actually the ravine which leads up to Madonna della Corona, which was another way out of the valley and another defensive position. It was possible to go up this ravine, as it was possible to go up the ravine at Belluno, but you can judge from this that it's not an easy option. And all of this, of course, leads to the point that these columns were not taking artillery with them, and they weren't taking cavalry with them either. At the maximum, they were going to take a few mountain guns on mules, and so any attack that they made on the French defensive positions around Ferrara and around Rivoli was going to be infantry only with some light artillery. Any cavalry or heavy artillery was going to be in the Adige Valley. There was no question of that. Excuse me. Moving on rapidly. This is the thoughts of Colonel Thomas Graham, who was a British officer who was accompanying the Austrians as a liaison officer, later famous as Wellington's second in command in the peninsula. And you can see what he thinks of this. He speaks of the inconveniences of such an undertaking. I cannot think that it was prudent to adopt a plan which at this season it was more than probable a fall of snow might render totally impracticable, especially when the success of the plan was acknowledged to depend on the celerity of its execution. And the absolute peach to me is, it was unfortunate too that nobody at headquarters but myself had ever been on the ground or knew anything of the situation or communications, except what was known very imperfectly from an indifferent plan by which the disposition of attack was made. Before they saw the ravine of Ferrara, they undervalued its strength and afterwards thought it impossible to be forced by an attack in front, which, however, had succeeded on the 29th of July. Yeah. Austrian planning at its finest. Yes, I can see smiles, chuckles, and shaking of heads. Yeah. Moving rapidly on. Let's look at Rivoli itself. The field itself has a number of sort of main areas of combat, of activity, which are relatively different, in some cases very different in terrain. This area, which I've just outlined in blue, is the San Marco area. This is where the fighting started before dawn, and it's a slope. It's a mountain slope. You'll see photographs. Very difficult terrain. This area here is utterly different. It's flat land, easy to maneuver troops on, very easy to move across, possible to use large conventional formations, not a problem. This area in the yellow square, that's the Pontare, that's the hill, all of this broken terrain. This is where the French had constructed redoubts, defensive positions with artillery. And it's a very, very steep hill to climb up. Then there is this area here, which once again is pretty flat land, relatively easy to move across. And this is, if you like, this is pretty much the last area of fighting. Not quite, but I mean, this is where the climactic moment of the battle happens. I just draw your attention to this semicircle. This is a line of morainic hills, which is basically the main French defensive position. This is Monte Trambasore, which I indicated earlier on. Now let's have a look at the ridge of San Marco. When Napoleon arrived in the middle of the night, he found Joubert, not Joubert, but Joubert, writing orders in the church at Rivoli. And immediately they went to have a look at the terrain, and they realized that Joubert had pulled back his troops from San Marco, from this ridge that you can see here, because there was a possibility of them being cut off. But Napoleon realized that this was a key defensive position, and there were some Austrian Grenzers light troops up here, and he immediately ordered Joubert to recapture San Marco. It's called San Marco because there was a chapel to Saint Mark on this particular ridge. Saint Mark, of course, is the patron saint of Venice, so that's why there was a chapel to San Marco. This was Venetian terrain, Venetian territory. The photographs I'm about to show you were taken where that second yellow mark is. It's a hill called Monte Cerredello. It's an extension of Monte Trambasore, essentially. It's another morainic hill. You'll see quite a bit of it because it's a very good vantage point. If you ever go to Rivoli yourselves, this is one of the best places to look at the battlefield. So standing on that point and looking eastwards, we're looking straight towards San Marco. And just to indicate, that ridge line is on the other side of the River Adige, not on this side. This ridge line is on this side of the River Adige. And that indicates San Marco. It's no longer a chapel. It was demolished, and there is now a 19th century fort that was constructed there. It's one of the spookiest places I've ever been. So initial fighting took place during the night, during the morning, before dawn, along this ridgeline and along those slopes. That's looking a little bit further to the north. You can see how the ridgeline extends. Scrubby terrain, bushes, trees, rocks, etc., etc. If you're up there, right on the top of the ridgeline, this is what it looks like. You can see down into the river, into the valley of the Adige there. You can see the Adige itself. You can see the Autostrada and the canal. This is hundreds and hundreds of feet of sheer rock face. And you can see just how hilly the terrain is. You can see that path running up the slope there. Looking a little bit further to the left there, once again, scrub, small trees, and you can see right down into on the left into the flat land. What kind of fighting was going on here? I don't know. I suspect it was people hiding behind trees, taking pot shots at each other. This is not a place for conventional maneuver, I would suggest. I mean, this looks very much like sort of cowboys and Indians type of fighting, or light infantry work. And if you stand on the edge and look over into the valley, this is what it looks like. Yeah. It's not, you're not going up and down there unless you have a parachute, I think. Moving on to the main combat area. Well, I call this the main combat area because while this toing and froing was going on along that particular ridge, Joubert referred to the fighting that took place there as 9 hours of advances and retreats. A rather more conventional piece of fighting was going on in this particular area. Once again, as I said, this is fairly flat terrain. This is the Monte Cerredello, once again, the place where I've been taking the photographs. I just point out this place, La Presa. It's an isolated farmhouse, which is quite a useful landmark for understanding where things are. And Caprino is the major village, small town now in the area. You can see on this map indications of where the Austrian columns were: Ochkai, then Kobles, and then Liptheim. And that blue line shows you Monte Trambasore, which is where the French demi-brigades belonging to, I must have been Massena's demi-brigades. That's where they were holding position. So looking into the area, this is roughly the area where Ochkai's troops would have been positioned. You can see flat terrain. It should have been relatively easy to maneuver, except for the fact that there were quite a lot of hedges, vineyards, low stone walls down here. So there were obstacles to Ochkai's ability to maneuver. Then Kobles would have been over here. We'll move around. We're moving our eye line around to the left. That's La Presa, the farmhouse I indicated. That's Caprino. This is the line of the main road, the main axis of advance, if you like, that the Austrians would have taken on their way towards the flat land, towards Mantua, effectively. Kobles would have been in this particular area. This is Google Maps. This is showing you the road leading directly north, just to give you an idea of what the road is like. It would have been a similar kind of width, I believe, in the 18th century, not metalled, of course. Looking once again from Monte Cerredello, this is where Liptai would have been positioned in front of Caprino. This is Monte Trambasore, so this is where the main French defenses would have been. And this is just turning around a little bit further to give you an idea of what the terrain was like inside those morainic hills. So behind the French defenses. And this is the continuation of the road which I showed you, going south eventually towards Mantua. Now, what did it look like to the Austrians? Well, Kerberos and Ochkai, well, Ochkai, I assume, advancing towards Montecerredello would have seen this. That ridge that you see in the background there, that's where I was standing when I took those photographs. So you can see this is fairly flat terrain. This is terrain on which you can maneuver. But that is a very, very, very steep hill. This gives you an idea of just how steep it is. I was among that group of figures that you can see standing there on the top of the hill. Exactly where the French positioned their troops, I don't know. I would assume some on the top of the hill, but quite possibly some on the lower slopes. And if they had artillery, I suspect they would have been on the lower ground, not up here, because because of depressing the guns. But that's just a supposition on my part. Another view of the same ridge. This is more where Kerberos would have been. He would have been advancing over this terrain, as you can see, flat, but with hedges, with vineyards. And once again, you notice how steep that hill is. This is looking from Liptai, yes, from Liptai, Kerberos, their position. This is looking towards Monte Trambasore, where Massena's troops would have been positioned. Once again, you can see this is quite a hill. It's a good defensive position. One thing to note is the number of trees. When I was there, I talked to an elderly lady and asked her if there'd always been this many trees on the slopes. And she said to me, "I've only been here 60 years. Thank you." But she said, when I was younger, no, there weren't this many trees because people used to chop them down for firewood. So there was a lot of coppicing going on. So the amount of woodland that we see here is likely to be much, much more than was there in the 18th century. Onto the Pontare, the road up which the French had to advance. Just to go back to the map, you will see, I hope, right in the middle of that map, a depiction of a redoubt with cannon. So the French had prepared defensive positions here, and the Austrians were faced with marching up against cannon fire up a very, very steep incline. Obviously, the Austrians were supported by their own artillery on the other side of the river, as you can see. However, that I wouldn't have liked to have made that attack. Well, this was one of the critical moments of the battle, obviously. Bit by bit, the Austrians did manage to force their way up that incline. But of course, it didn't end well for them. This is looking from Montecerredello, looking southwards towards the Pontare, just to give you another impression of what the terrain was like. You'll see there's an open cast mine there, which of course didn't exist at the time. This would have been completely flat land. You can just see the corner of the River Adige there, and that line indicates the edge of the flat land. Beyond that, we go down into the Pontare. And same pictures as before, basically. Now, just going back to this view, just take a moment to describe this area. We know from accounts that the Austrians managed to just about get to the top of the Pontare. They were beginning to spread out across this flat land. To the north, the Austrians had managed to get beyond Monticello dei. They had begun to filter over that ring of hills into the flat land, and Joubert and others were basically hanging on by their fingernails at this particular point. And this is where it all turns for the Austrians. Thomas Graham, who was with Liptai on the hills to the right of the picture there, to the north, commented that as the Austrian troops began to filter over the hills and into the flat land, they began to lose cohesion. They began to spread out. They began to lose formation. And Liptai was concerned about being flanked on his right. And there was a bit of hesitation and a bit of worry. And Graham said that at this point, for some reason that he wasn't able to determine, a cry began to go up among the Austrians' French cavalry. And he said a total panic ensued. And the Austrian troops began to run. Those of Liptai began to run. And they began to run back over the hills, back north as fast as they could. In this particular area here, and I think it's Sulkowski, Napoleon's Polish aide, who said that as the French troops fell back from their defensive positions around the Pontare, they naturally began to flow towards a large farmhouse which had a large field in front of it. Now, I suspect that the farmhouse that he was referring to is the one that you can see in the picture there with all of this flat land around it. And he said that it was easy to rally the French troops at this particular point. We also hear that a small amount of French cavalry did actually make an attack. There are all kinds of legends about this, which many of which I'm inclined to doubt. People like to mention the name of La Salle, for example. Well, yeah, possibly he was involved, but also General Leclerc was likely involved. But it was a very, very small amount of French cavalry. This was not any large attack. This is not Joachim Murat doing his thing and sweeping across the plains at the head of hundreds of cuirassiers. This was a much, much smaller affair. added to that, the French infantry that they managed to rally was able to, under Joubert's command, to move forward and to begin a plunging fire on the Austrian troops that were still trying to come up the Pontare, while the head of the Austrian troops that had just about managed to get onto the flat land were pushed back and began to flow down the Pontare again, and a huge traffic jam seems to have ensued on that narrow road, winding road, and a complete chaos ensued. And that basically was it as far as the battle was concerned. Rapidly to the monument. Just a quick look at the monument with this dedication monument raised in 1806 to the memory of the combatants of Rivoli, destroyed by the Austrians in 1814, and a dedication from the soldiers of the French army of 1917 to 18 to their glorious ancestors of 1797.
Thank you, everyone. Fascinating conversation so far. I'm about to end our recording, but please stay online as we continue the chat. To wrap up this month's Rally Point, thank you, Martin, for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Martin.
And for those of you who've joined us this evening live, thank you for your time with us. Next time, why not join us here at the Rally Point next month when we catch up with Hans Karl Weiss. Hans Karl has been doing an expose on musketry and firing in the ranks. We've done 2 presentations. Karl is going to build on those ideas. So simply contact Dominic or I for your Zoom invite, and our details are at the end of the video. And share Rally Point with friends so we can hear from them as well. Now, any previous Rally Point chats are up on our YouTube channel. And so if you have enjoyed this Rally Point, please leave a simple review. So it's good morning from me, and it's good night from him.
Good night.